right. Welcome back. This is Jeannie. This is The Real Story. And if you want to weigh in on the conversation, the phone number here is 312-642-5600. Tom from Blue Island, I know you're waiting on the line. I'm going to ask you to hold on a little bit. I want to get through this interview because I have my guest waiting. And it's somebody that you're familiar with, and it's a great time to have him on. It's Steve Goreham. He's the executive director for the Climate Science Coalition of America and author of 4 books on energy, climate change, sustainable development, and public policy, with over 100,000 copies in print. His latest book is Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure. I absolutely love that title. But I tell you what, it's one thing that the Illinois Democrats do not believe in. And before we get to you, Steve, I want to have you comment on this clip. This is State Senator Bill Cunningham, and he is talking about what he thinks is needed and what the next thing that they want us to invest in the state of Illinois in order to make their renewable energy dreams come true. Take a listen.
The reason we're doing this is because Illinois is at risk of experiencing power shortages, and we're also facing skyrocketing energy costs in the very near future. Illinois energy demands will outpace our supply as early as 2030. Battery storage is needed to reduce that probability and the expense.
Premature to aim at shuttering coal plants?
I don't think so.
Resource, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. You know, this is part of a transition, okay? And a lot of coal plants, every coal plant in Illinois, except for municipally owned coal plants like Prairie State and Springfield, were already scheduled to close before we passed CEJA. They're just not economical, cost a ton to keep up. They were all NRG, Vistra owned all the private coal burning generators in the state. They were all scheduled to close. So that was happening before CEJA. That's happening in other states. Illinois isn't the only state where that's happening in. What we tried to construct with CEJA is a ramp to deal with that. The main way we tried to do it was with a lot of renewable generation. One of the things that's been very frustrating to that is we have a 4 or 5 year line for renewable generation to get onto the grid. So that's a problem. We're having the traditional fossil fuel generation going down, and what we thought would be an increase in renewable generation being blocked essentially by the transmission organizations that Illinois is divided into. So, and now add to this, when we did CEJA, no one ever talked about data centers. It wasn't something we considered at all. So the ground has really shifted, and we need to come up with new ways to deal with this, and really storage is an essential part of that. And that's what this bill's about.
Okay, Steve, so they want to invest in battery storage, and this is going to solve all their renewable problems. But unfortunately, there's another big disruption coming, and hopefully we're going to talk about that tonight, and that's the disruption that Trump is causing by taking away all the subsidies at the federal level. So first of all, your comment on this, I personally don't think coal's going away. PJM right now, 23% of the energy generated right now in the PJM market is contributed by coal. And in the MISO market, it's more than that. I'm looking it up on my app as we speak. What say you about all this?
Hey, Jeannie, great to join you again. Yeah, Representative Cunningham, I have to disagree in many ways. First off, what we're seeing around the country, and by the way, coal was not being closed because it was too expensive. Some of the facilities were old, and that may be the case, but it's all because of this fear of man-made warming and trying to get rid of carbon dioxide. A very bad idea to try and do it with wind and solar. He talks about how it takes 4 or 5 years to get transmission. Well, one of the problems is you need 2 or 3 times as much transmission for wind and solar because they take 100 times the land of a coal plant or a nuclear plant or a gas plant, and they're scattered over wide areas. So you have to go build all this transmission, and then people don't want transmission built through their backyards, and so you end up with all these delays. And he also, in there, said he thought batteries were low cost. That's just flat out wrong. So here's from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in 2023, And they said they estimated the cost of putting up a utility-scale solar system about $1 million per megawatt. But to back that up with grid-scale batteries for just 4 hours takes $1.5 million. And 4 hours is nothing. If you want to back up intermittent wind and solar for a day, it would take $9 million in batteries to back up $1 million in solar, 9 times as much. And then, oh, by the way, the batteries only have a life that's half the solar. So you're talking about a battery cost that is more than 10 times the cost of the solar facility itself. Extremely, extremely expensive.
And then how do you dispose of it? How do you dispose of it at the end of its life?
Well, that's another problem, too. And then we got all these fires going on. I just talked to a guy in Washington State. They had another fire up there with a battery system. They've had 3 fires this year in New York, last year in New York State on grid-scale batteries. 2 big fires in California, one this year, one last year. There's just all sorts of problems with these batteries. So we need to sit down with Mr. Cunningham and educate him.
Well, since you're an Illinois resident, I am going to suggest that you go down and you actually testify in the Energy and Environment Committee in at least the House and hopefully in the Senate. And I'm going to make that demand. And I'm going to connect you with the Republicans down there. And we need to get you and your information in front of them because this is absolute nonsense. But the good news is that to some degree, we might be saved. Illinois, you might be saved by Trump and his policies on this because they're common sense. And so it does appear that the EPA under Lee Zeldin is seriously considering a rollback of the 2009 EPA endangerment finding on carbon dioxide. Yes. What's going to be the impact on this?
Yeah, that just happened last year. So the 2009 EPA endangerment finding, the EPA said that greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide threaten the public health and the welfare of current and future generations of U.S. citizens. And this has become the basis of all of the greenhouse gas legislation at a federal level and much of the state levels. Well, Trump, on his first day in office, put out an executive order called Unleashing American Energy. And in it, he asked the new head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, to look at the endangerment finding. And last week, Zeldin said that they're going to want to roll this back. At least that's what the press is saying. I don't think it's been publicly announced yet. This would be a huge, huge change. It's going to be a 6-month press battle. It might be a longer court battle. But they're also doing things like shutting off funding. Again, in Washington State, $500 million from the EPA and others is being shut down. In Indiana, they've shut down funding. I'm not sure what the number is in Illinois. But all these green programs, they all rely on subsidies, and they're going to be just standing by the sidelines. We're going to have a lot of bankruptcies as well. So really, really big impact by Mr. Trump.
Well, your book was then prescient. The coming failure of renewable energy just got accelerated. I mean, it was going to fall under its own accord anyway, but he's going to accelerate that failure. The interesting thing is I was at and this is why I wanted you to have on this weekend. The weekend before, I was telling listeners that I had been at on a panel about pensions and budget and stuff, and a lady came up to me and she essentially had got another conversation going and said, "Well, aren't you worried about climate change? This is a big deal. I mean, it's going to be a problem." And I said, "No. I mean, and by the way, CO2 is not a pollutant. So
nope,
is it a
not.
pollutant or what?"
No, we each exhale. Every person on Earth exhales about 2 pounds of carbon dioxide a day. And by the way, the world's top 7 food crops, there are hundreds of peer-reviewed studies say that plants grow bigger and faster with higher levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Corn, potatoes, wheat, sugarcane, rice, soybeans, sugar beets all grow between 20 and 60% bigger. They get bigger fruits, bigger vegetables. Literally, if there's one compound we could put in the environment that is absolutely great for the biosphere, carbon dioxide is that compound. Yet we have every company and every university trying to cut their emissions. It's the biggest superstition in history.
Yeah, well, you know what? Guess who knows that? The marijuana growers know that because they pump it into their greenhouses. Like, come on.
They do. They're smarter than the EPA was. I think the EPA is getting smarter, though. But so this, this is just a tremendous thing. In addition, Mr. Trump called for a rollback of the Green New Deal that Representative Ocasio-Cortez was pitching a number of years ago.
Well,
He has
how many years
withdrawn
are
from
we
the
into?
Paris.
How many years are we into her 12-year?
I think it was about 2018 or 19. Yeah, the world
okay, we
was
still
going to
got a
collapse
ways.
within.
Okay.
We got a ways to go. Mr. Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords again, and he also stopped $4 billion a year in funding for these climate projects at the United Nations level. And so he's just this is night and this is day, and a huge shift. And this could be the start of the rolling back in green energy across the world. It's going to take a couple decades, but yeah, I predicted in my book. We'll see how far we go on this.
So, well, I mean, for me, I'm always looking at what's going to happen, and at what point does Rivian start to decide that they maybe need to come up with a hybrid model instead of just a pure EV? What happens? Is there any way that Goshen's going to fold? Because obviously they're not going to get a federal subsidy if Trump pulls them back, and the federal subsidy is even more valuable than the state subsidies for those EV battery manufacturing. So where does that all stand? And is that coming to fruition, or is that going to take a long time, or has that already been locked in through the IRA?
We're going to have a whole bunch of bankruptcies. Nikola, last month declared bankruptcy. It had been worth $30 billion when it did initial public offering 4 years ago. You mentioned Rivian. They're the next one on the line. Last year they lost $400 million on $400 million in revenue, and the Biden administration gave them a $6.6 billion loan to build a plant in Atlanta. This is going to make Solyndra look like small potatoes when they go down. There's another company called Plug Power that makes green hydrogen that lost $1 billion last year. Plug Power has never made a profit in 28 years of its existence, and they keep getting federal money for all this stuff. But I'll give you another example, too. All these EV charging stations, nobody can make money on charging in the U.S., EV charging. They all get subsidies and funds. Trump just cut them off. The General Services Administration, which takes care of all the buildings in the U.S. government, said it's going to shut down 8,000 EV chargers and offload all of its EVs that it was purchasing. So there's some big shifts going on.
Wow. That's huge. And you had companies too, like Stellantis, essentially toying with the idea that they were going to open up their Belvedere plant, and that's what the original agreement was. It was going to be an EV plant plus an EV battery plant, a whole $5 billion investment. I mean, there's nothing coming out in the news saying that they're actually going to do that. It only says that they are going to reopen the plant, which was also part of the union negotiation that they did with UAW, that they reopened that plant. But before, at the time that decision was made, of course, it was going to be EVs because that's what Pritzker wanted, and certainly he was going to subsidize it. But now they came back and said, we'll open up the plant, but they did not specify what type of vehicle would be built there.
Yeah, I think that might change your mind. By the way, Trump has also called for the elimination of $7,500 tax credit for EVs.
Oh, boy.
He's going to have to get that through Congress. Mm-hmm. And so these things, and by the way, there's also a bill in Congress now to charge EVs $1,000 in taxes, because right now they pay nothing for federal road taxes. And by the way, EVs are 50% heavier on average than a gasoline car, so they should be paying more for taxes. So there's just an awful lot of things piling up.
Do you know if
we're going to see huge changes?
Yeah, is Trump able to do most of that without congressional approval, or is he able to get rid of some of that, or do you think this will be rolled into his one big bill when he extends tax credits or cuts and all that?
I think they're going to need a second bill. I think they're going to need a second bill and try and scale that back. But there's a lot of support for it, so I have to see.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so in your recent book, Green Breakdown, you predict that the world is heading for a renewable energy failure. And exactly, I mean, you've basically described it. Is there anything more, though, to say about that?
Well, not really, but I would encourage people to get it. It's a complete discussion of this push for net zero, push for green energy, and why it's going to fail, including power plants, home appliances, electric vehicles, heavy transportation, heavy industry, all the way through. It's also a color paperback, and it's got 150 sidebars in it of all these crazy headlines about energy and climate, like this dating website that said global warming makes couples cheat. So I always say, now I have an excuse. Global warming made me do it. But people should get it, and they should And it'll give them beyond what they're getting in the press. They'll get the real story about what's going on in all these areas and how we're going to get back to sensible energy policy.
Well, look, I don't want people, I mean, we're pretty much an Illinois-based show, and so we like to cover a lot of topics that are Illinois. Obviously, we delve into things that affect everybody in the federal government. But when you talk about this topic and you talk about Illinois-specific, I want to be clear here. Your Illinois legislature passed legislation saying that your school districts have to teach about climate change. So if they have to teach about the subject, and nobody here disagrees that the climate changes has been changing since the climate existed. What we're disagreeing about is that you and I living on this earth and yep. eating beef is making the problem is the big problem. So I suggest you get your teachers. Go ahead, donate it to the public school, donate it to your teachers teaching science, give them a green breakdown, the coming renewable energy failure. I think it's a great idea. People should buy it for their teacher.
That would be great. By the way, there's a whole bunch of other states that are rolling this stuff back. Iowa now is pulling it out of their curriculum. Florida has pulled it out. There was a bill in Wyoming called Make CO2 Great Again. That was defeated. But Oklahoma is looking to ban wind turbines, and Arizona is looking to use setbacks on wind turbines, like 12 miles from any house. So there are many, many movements across, not in Illinois, but across the country now where people are pushing back on this.
Well, good news for consumers, I think, personally, and actually good news for the environment because what they call green is not necessarily green. Okay, he's Steve Goreham. I want to thank you so much for coming on my show, Executive Director of the Climate Science Coalition of America and the author of numerous books. You can find his stuff at stevegoreham.com. That's his website. Steve, thanks so much for joining me on The Real Story.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Great. And we'll be right back with your phone calls.